Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. After listening to the contributions from the honourable members of the opposition, it became blatantly obvious that they were completely oblivious of the rationale and the need of such a 2021-2022 budget. The lack of imagination to respond to, or the humility to agree with the merits of the budget, led to a desperate and fruitless path of politicization, creating fear of a basic administrative matter, and in the process have demeaned and disrespected the intellect of the landowners and the general population at large, and basically a wholesale digression of discussing anything but the budget. In simple terms, Mr. Speaker, sir, or they may understand in TikTok terms, they lost the plot. In fact, they were completely caught off guard with the budget, Mr. Speaker, sir, because they only had doom and gloom in their mind and were therefore not expecting the bold and extraordinary measures that were announced. They were hoping that we will fail in this budget, that we will announce major cuts to civil service salaries, pull back on social welfare and income support for the unemployed, increase taxes perhaps, and leave our businesses and our MSMEs behind. They were definitely not prepared for a people's budget designed to put people first, designed, in fact, to put Fiji first. Mr. Speaker, sir, the opposition also could not accept the fact that we are far ahead in the game to achieve herd immunity. It is just a matter of months, and we will be there soon, God willing, Mr. Speaker, sir. That is what is hurting them, as they cannot see this crisis coming to an end, because they have realized that despite their cunning attempts to take political advantage from this pandemic, they have failed, Mr. Speaker, sir. And with the crisis ending, they don't have much time left on their hand. We have taken vaccination very seriously, Mr. Speaker, sir, because the science and the country experiences have shown that mass vaccination is the only permanent and suitable solution to this pandemic, the only permanent way to bring back living the normal life. We thank the governments of Australia, New Zealand, India, and now USA, and all other partners who have provided us the vaccines through Gavi. We'll be forever grateful for their support. We also thank the hundreds of thousands of Fijians now that have come forward to be vaccinated. The worst will be over soon, Mr. Speaker, sir. With everyone's support, we have made tremendous progress, Mr. Speaker, sir, with 76.7% of 449,934 Fijians of the target population receiving the first dose, and 17.7% or 103,742 people receiving both doses. We are well on track to get 80% of the target population vaccinated by October 31st. But of course, we cannot be complacent. As the Honourable Prime Minister has said, let's target 100% of the target population. We cannot lose this opportunity, and we urge everyone who have got their first shot to ensure that you get a second jab when due. Those that have not had the first jab should get it in the next few days. Mr. Speaker, so again, a number of the opposition members were saying that we are overly dependent on vaccination. Honourable Rosova said, government's motto is vaccination, vaccination, vaccination. What is the alternative, Mr. Speaker, sir? What is the alternative? There is none, and of course they won't offer any. If they think we should have a complete lockdown, it is not a sustainable solution, as we've seen everywhere in the world. Vaccination is the only solution now, Mr. Speaker, sir. That is why our development partners, and now the bulk of it is from Australia and New Zealand, are giving us the vaccines, because that is the solution. That's how we will be able to get our borders open. That's how they will open up their borders to us. That's how we can get the tourists back, rebuild our economy, and get people back to jobs. Mr. Speaker, sir, that if we are able to get the target population vaccinated using the vaccines provided by the Australian and New Zealand governments, we will go back to them and they will be more confident in opening the border. Of course, with protocols and safe measures in place. They will feel safe to tell the citizens to come to Fiji for a holiday and not necessarily having to do a quarantine upon their return. That's how you get the tourism numbers up. That's how we get the hotel workers back to work. That's how we open up the hotels, all the ancillary businesses that surround the tourism sector will also open. If we just rely on lockdowns and no vaccinations, unfortunately, we will forever be closed to the outside world. That is why, Mr. Speaker, sir, the opposition wants a lockdown, because they don't want this crisis to end. So they could blame the socio-economic woes of this crisis on the government and make this an election issue. And that's what they seem to be focused on. Mr. Speaker, sir, even COVID-related debts have been politicized in this debate. Honorable Tambuya, Honorable Garrigan Tambua, and others did not shy a cent away from politicizing COVID-related debts, unashamedly, completely being inconsiderate of the lost lives and the families. Mr. Speaker, sir, hundreds of thousands of people have unfortunately lost their lives due to the virus all over the world. But we do not have opposition members in those countries blaming those deaths on the Prime Minister or the government. Australia has had over 900 COVID-related deaths. Did the opposition blame the government there? In these countries, they're all working together, sir, to fight this crisis. It's only here that the opposition, while harping about bipartisanship, cannot even work with government on one single issue. They're too busy thinking about elections. They're too busy thinking about how they can score a small political point. They're too busy thinking about how many likes will I get in the next 1 hour. Please, the opposition should stop politicizing this crisis. But of course, I think as we've seen in the past, it will fall on deaf ears. Mr. Speaker, sir, why I've highlighted these issues is because we are reliably informed, not from one source, but many sources, that many opposition political parties and opposition members were celebrating prior to the budget, hoping that we will fail in the budget, Mr. Speaker, sir. They not only wanted us to fail, but they wanted Fiji to fail and succumb to the crisis, because that means political points for them. Of course, Mr. Speaker, sir, we've never fallen that low. We are here for the people, and we'll get this country out of this crisis in a sustainable way. This budget is just a start to that process. Mr. Speaker, sir, everyone needs to understand that the 2021 and 2022 budget was delivered under very challenging circumstances. We've always said that. The economy was hit hard by the pandemic, estimated to have contracted by 15.7% in 2020. Public finances have been under pressure as tax revenues took a major blow, declining by about 50%, and unemployment levels rose, making the socio-economic situation challenging. But somehow, Mr. Speaker, sir, the opposition, especially the leader of opposition, Honorable Alam Balabu, then Honorable Kurindranti, Honorable Prasad, and many others have been trying to portray that the current economic crisis is solely the doing of the Fijian government, in their favorite line that we have mismanaged the economy. This, of course, Mr. Speaker, is absurd. Almost every single nation in the world has been affected, and the economy is contracting. The majority of the tourism-dependent economies experienced double-digit economic contraction, Mr. Speaker, sir. These are facts. These are available publicly. Yet, of course, the opposition does not like the facts. They will still sing the same old fables, the same old storylines. So the current economic crisis and challenge, Mr. Speaker, sir, is not something that is unique to Fiji. Every other country has suffered from this devastating once in a 100-year economic shock. No country has been spared. But again, it's unfortunate that the opposition members have been trying to politicize the economy during one of the largest global economic crises that we're trying to come out from. And we will come out of soon. We'll come out of it soon, Mr. Speaker, sir. Honorable Prasad, we've said this so many times since 2014. Despite being an economist who should understand the economic consequences of border closures for almost 17 months in a tourism-dependent country, has also been trying to blame the entire effects of the crisis on the government. They've been continuously trying to undermine the economy and somehow seem to be under the illusion that if we lock down the economy, we'll be out of the economic crisis. When last year when we locked down, they were opposed to it. Mr. Speaker, sir, if we go that path, the economy will crumble down. We will need a sustainable solution, which is vaccination and gradual opening up of our international borders, and indeed even within the country itself. Honorable Prasad and some others seem to also imply that because the economy is slowing down pre-COVID, the current economic contraction is because of that. No, Mr. Speaker, sir. We've never denied that the Fijian economy started to slow down in 2019, but was still growing. Yes, it was slowing down pre-COVID due to the slowing global economy. But that does not mean that the current contraction is due to the continuation of the slowdown. There needs to be intellectual honesty. Absence of it. It's very clear that the current contraction could not be avoided if your borders are closed for 17 months. Any Form 6 student can tell you that. However, had we not had the current pandemic, our economy would have been in a very different state altogether. But as I've said, Mr. Speaker, sir, Honorable Prasad, as I always have said, lacks the intellectual honesty to give the real picture, as he is very much focused on elections and his political experience and aspiration to form government and perhaps even become Prime Minister. For Honorable Prasad and NFP to think they can form the next government is just a dream. First, they should work on having a majority in the opposition before they can think about having a majority to form government. They've been rejected time and again at every poll, and with this level of dishonesty and greed for power, Mr. Speaker, sir, they will never succeed. Mr. Speaker, sir, at this juncture, I would also like to quickly touch on the issue of printing money. Ms. Honorable Tambuya spent a considerable amount of time talking about printing money in her response. I'm also told she's, of course, made a few TikToks on printing money. Mr. Speaker, sir, I would be worried if the opposition were to prepare a national budget if they think the solution for everything is to print money. Maybe this is one reason why they have never been able to come up with an alternative budget. And there is a point. NFP and SODELPA have never come up with an alternative budget. Even during elections, they have not come up with a budget. Mr. Speaker, sir, printing money may sound simple and attractive, but it's much more complex. It's a much more complex issue. Firstly, I'd like to remind Honorable Tambuya that the government doesn't have the legal right to print money. In every country, including in Fiji, this is left in the independent hands of the central bank, the RBA in our case. We do not interfere with the decisions of independent institutions, in particular, the monetary policies that is governed and run by the Reserve Bank of Fiji. Again, Mr. Speaker, so it's shocking that a former governor and the current leader of Unity Party also preaches about this interference with the RBF, and yet they talk about central bank independence on the other hand. Mr. Speaker, sir, there is a process called quantitative easing or monetization of government debt, or in simple terms, what Honorable Tambuya may refer to as printing of money. But if the RBF engages in this process, it can only lend to government. That means it will sit as a debt in the government books. It does not mean that RBF prints money and distributes it to the public and gives it to free to government, Mr. Speaker, sir. When we present a budget, we put out a financing plan, as in page 321 of the budget estimates. You have the books there, listing where we will borrow money from. We do not decide nor tell the RBF to finance the debt, completely taking away the independence. Heaven forbid if these people are elected to government, that's what they'll do. But of course, if the central bank thinks that it is necessary, they can take that independent decision themselves to finance government debt. But as I've said, it's a complex matter and it's better to be left in the independent hands of the central bank. However, the central bank, when considering such decisions, have to look at many factors like what are the implications of such a decision on its mandate and policy objectives. And they have to ensure they're acting within the legal framework, which is the RBF Act. They need to be mindful of the impact it will have in the government securities, bond market, as understandably, they would not want to come in and compete with market players like the banks, insurance companies, and FNPF. They have to be mindful of the implications on the reserves, the liquidity, inflation, and overall economy. And of course, they have to be careful, not creating dependency of government on central bank financing. These are the reasons, Mr. Speaker, sir, why we cannot and why we should not dictate to the RBF to lend to government as suggested by Honorable Tambuya. In fact, she's not even saying to lend. She's saying to simply print and give. Mr. Speaker, so on one hand, Honorable Tabuya also talks about debt, and on the other hand, talks about printing money, meaning borrowing more from the RBF, if she actually means borrowing. But even if she did mean borrowing, isn't that a contradiction? Or is it plain simple, she does not understand this economic, what she may call jargon, but pretends to know it? Any printing of money and funding of the deficit means lending to government. You cannot print and give free money to government. It will mean that the paper will have no value at all. Mr. Speaker, sir, printing money meant no debt. Why aren't other countries doing it? Why didn't the Ratu Mara government do it? Why didn't the Rambuka, Chaudhry or Garase government print money in the manner as she understands and give it free to government? In fact, the RBF limits how much it can lend to government. There is no free money that can be created by printing money, Mr. Speaker, sir. So I hope that Honorable Tambuya talks to the better finance advisor to understand this. But I know that she is only used to Ponzi schemes that exist in other jurisdictions. Mr. Speaker, sir, Honorable Tuisawau and Honorable Lalambalavu claimed that revenue projection and the budget is optimistic, when I had clearly explained in the budget address, with a lot of details provided in the budget supplement, that we are taking a very conservative revenue estimation strategy due to the uncertainties. We use a similar strategy for the 2020-2021 budget, and it worked well during these times of uncertainty, Mr. Speaker, sir. If I could explain. When we delivered the 2020-2021 budget, it was delivered under a period of great uncertainty, and thus the budget framework was based on a very conservative revenue projection, resulting in a large projected deficit of $2 billion, equivalent to 20.2% of the GDP. With the financial year 2020-2021 almost coming to a close in a few days' time, the fiscal deficit is likely to be around 11.5% of GDP, almost half of 20.2% budgeted net deficit, because our revenues are estimated to have overperformed and we maintained a tight control on expenditure. With a lower projected net deficit of around 11.5% in 2020-2021, government debt is estimated to be around $7.6 billion, or 79.2% of GDP as of July 2021. This is almost $700 million lower than the earlier projected debt of $8.3 billion, or 83.4% of GDP. If the nominal GDP is unchanged at the levels projected in the budget, the debt to GDP ratio would have been much lower at 76.8% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, says similarly to the last budget, a conservative revenue estimation strategy has also been adopted for the 2021-2022 budget. The downside of the strategy is that projected deficit and debt levels look higher. And in this case, 2021-2022 deficit projected at 16.2% of GDP, and debt expected to rise to $9 billion, or 91.6% of GDP. However, Mr. Speaker, so it is a prudent strategy to adopt during times of uncertainty, with any over collections in revenues serving as a buffer, and consequently lower borrowings and debt levels than planned. As we saw in this financial year, it is likely that actual debt could be lower than projected if border reopening and pickup in tourism and other sectors are much stronger than anticipated. Again, Mr. Speaker, sir, the Honourable Leader of Opposition seems to have the misconception that if our revenues underperform, it gives us the leeway to borrow more and increase the debt further. That is fundamentally not true, Mr. Speaker, sir. The borrowing limit and the total appropriation is capped and approved by Parliament. If revenue collections are below forecast, we will have to come back to Parliament to increase borrowings if we're going to carry on with the same levels of expenditure. It is not something that can be done automatically as the Leader of Opposition thinks. Further, Mr. Speaker, sir, I had said this clearly in the address also, the Ministry of Economy will closely monitor the fiscal performance in the months ahead with a likely revision of the budget in the second half of the financial year of 2020.